Bhagavate Sri Ramana.
Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. We will begin today's satsang with the invocatory verse from Tirumantiram, composed by Tirumular. ஐந்து கரத்தனை யானை முகத்தனை இந்தி இளம்பிறை போல மெய்ற்றனை நந்தி மகந்தனை ஞான கொழுந்தினை புந்தியில் வைத்தடி போற்றுகின்றேனே. This is a prayer in praise of Lord Ganesha to bestow his grace for us to complete the task at hand, which is to understand Ramana Puranam as composed by Bhagavan and Sri Muruganar. We will likely start from last week's verses, and then we will start new lines beginning today. Last time we spoke, we started at line number 161. Padam Taivandu Parasakti Kaisivappa தாய் தந்தை இன்றி உள தான் தோன்றி தாழ் போற்றி வேத்திரக் கோல் போன்று வெறிதிருக்கும் அம்மனமே மாத்திரை கோலாகி வலம் சுற்றி லேசானே ஐந்தொழில்கள் ஆற்றும் அவரவர் மாட்டு அம்முறை அவ் ஐந்தொழில் நன்கு ஆற்றும் அசல சித்தன் தாழ் போற்றி தேற்றமாம் அவ்வுண்மை தேராது தாம் அவற்றை ஆற்றலாய் அன்னார் அகங்கரிப்பின் அவ்வாண்மை கோபுரம் தாங்கும் பிம்ப கூத்து என என் கோது அகத்தைச் சார்பெதும் தோன்றாது அழியச் சாய்த்தோன் அடி போற்றி தம்மையலாம் தாங்குபெறு தானுவாம் பண்டியில் தம் சும்மையும் தாம்போட்டு துயர் நீங்கும் பாங்கரியார் தாங்குவதாய் அச்சுமையை தன் தலைமேல் ஆணவத்தால் வாங்குவதால் என்றும் வாழா வருந்துருவார் மூரிநீர் போல முழங்குவார் மூங்கையராய் யாரை நீரெண்ணின் இருந்தாங்கு ஒடுங்குருவார் ஊனப் பிணம்போல் உறங்கி உணர்வாற்றல் ஒழிந்து ஏனை அவத்தைக் கண் எழுப்பினாலன்றி எழார். I want to check if you could see my screen.
Sorry, we couldn't see the screen. Could you please share your screen?
Oh, we'll do that again. Give me one second. Do you now see the screen, Bhaskar?
Yes, we can see it now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so with that, we ended last week, lines number 175 through 178. So beginning today, we would start at lines 179 through 184. தன்னை எழுப்பிவிடின் தானே தனி பொருது துன்னலரை எல்லாம் தொலைப்பலெனும் ஓர் முடவன் போல் தாம் இயங்கும் தன்மை சிவசக்தியால் என்றுணரார் தாம் மயங்கி சித்திபல சார்வதா சேட்டிப்பார் உச்சமத்த மாக்கள் உளறுபடி ஊக்கமாம் அச்சமர்த்தை எள்ளி நகையாடுவோன் தாழ் போற்றி. Here Bhagavan has given an analogy about how a lame person with deluded mind and ego thinks that he can win an entire army if only he could get help to stand up. So Bhagavan has used this analogy in a number of different places, particularly in talks and day by day. So Muruganar weaves this 6 lines around that same exact analogy that Bhagavan had given to show us the bravado of our own ego and the delusion of our smartness without remembering that the entire action is done by the Shiva Shakti union, and we wrongly claim credit because of our delusion and ego, and that is ignorance. And Bhagavan alone can remove that ignorance by bestowing us the truth of the self. So that is the essence of these 6 lines. But we will take this up in detail, word at a time. தன்னை எழுப்புவிடின் தானே தனி பொருது துன்னலரை எல்லாம் தொலைப்பல் எனும் ஓர் முடவன் போல். So these 2 lines lay down the metaphor about this lame person. தன்னை எழுப்புவிடின். If only he could be made to stand. Tannai is himself. எழுப்புவிடின் meaning if he could be made to stand up. Thane, he alone. Tani பொருது, he alone can fight alone. He alone can fight without any help. துன்னலரை எல்லாம். Tunnalar is those with opposite opinions, or here it's more aptly used as in enemies or the army of the attacking king. Tunnalarai ellam. So he can fight against an entire army. Tolaipal. Tolaipal is win against, or he can destroy the entire army. Yenum. Likewise, or Mudavan says a cripple. Mudavan is a cripple or a lame person. Pol. Pol is likewise. So going back, தன்னை எழுப்புவிடின் தானே தனிப்பொருது துன்னலரை எல்லாம் தொலைப்பலெரும் ஓர் முடவன் போல். Help me to get up, that I can fight alone and vanquish a whole army all by myself. So that's what it means. Says who? A cripple. Likewise, தாம் இயங்கும் தன்மை சிவசக்தியால் என்று உணரார். தாம் இயங்கும் தன்மை. Their ability to function is entirely reliant on Shiva Shakti union, which we spoke about last time we met. தாம் இயங்கும் தன்மை சிவசக்தியால். The manifested and the unmanifested reality alone make any work possible. And that alone is responsible for us to function the way that we function without realizing it. Endru unarar, without realizing it, and without getting clarity of this reality. Tam mayangi. Mayangi is deluding. Tam mayangi, completely deluding. Siddhi pala sarvada settippar. They think they accomplish all deeds and miraculous experiences. Siddhi is miracles or actions or experiences. Pala, many. Sarvada, having manifested or having done. Settippar, they go about blabbering. So, தாம் இயங்கும் தன்மை சிவசக்தியால் என்று உணரார் தாம் மயங்கிச் சித்திபல சார்வதா சேட்டிப்பார். Without fully understanding that the entire experience is made possible because of the Shiva Shakti union, people with deluded mind go around and claim they manifest every action and every miracle. And how does Muruganar call them? Ucha matta makkal ularubadi ukkamam. Mattam is very deluded. Ucha mattam is completely the height of delusion, the height of confusion. Makkal means makkal, which are people. So those highly confused people, ularu padi ukkamam. Ularu padi is speaking out of turn or blabbering.  enthusiastically blabbering or empty bravado. because they just speak without understanding the truth. That's the definition of empty bravado. And what does Bhagavan do? Achamartai elli nagayaduvon. Looking at them, he just simply smiles, appreciating their cunningness or their delusion. Chamarti. Chamarti is a false smartness or pretentious smartness. What is the pretentious smartness? Without realizing, the whole action is being orchestrated and manifested and executed to perfection because of the manifested and unmanifested part of the self. People think they made something possible. That is the definition of delusion. And since they falsely identify themselves with their body, they think they had manifested that action. And they can claim that they also go on manifest other miracles and other deeds. Amused by the deluded fervor, Bhagavan smiles at their empty bravado. Thal Potri, praise be to his holy feet. So going back, தன்னை எழுப்பிவிடின் தானே தனிப்பொருது துன்னலரை எல்லாம் தொலைப்பலெனும் ஓர் முடவன் போல். Prop him up, and a cripple will boast he can vanquish the entire army alone. Likewise, the proud people blind to their own reliance on Shiva Sakti claim sole credit for every deed and miracle. தாமியங்கும் தன்மை சிவசக்தியால் என்றுணரார் தாம் மயங்கிச் சித்திபல சார்வதா சேட்டிப்பார் உச்ச மத்த மாக்கள் உளறுபடி ஊக்கமாம் அச்சமர்த்தை எள்ளி நகையாடுவோன் தாழ் போற்றி. Amused by the deluded fervor, he smiles at their empty bravado. Praise be to his holy feet. Bhagavan, in fact, has given this exact same example on 19th of June, 1936, in talk number 210. I have put that up here for reference. It reads as following: man owes his movement to another power, whereas he thinks that he does everything himself. Just like a lame man bluffing that where he helped to stand up, he would fight and chase away the enemy. Action is impulsed by desire. Desire arises only after the rise of the ego, and this ego owes its origin to a higher power on which its existence depends. It cannot remain apart. Why then prattle, I do, I act, or I function? A self-realized being cannot help benefiting the world. His very existence is the highest good. This exact idea is reflected in Guruvachaka Kovai, verse number 169. If you recollect, Guruvachaka Kovai is a set of verses composed by Muruganar whenever he heard an utterance from Bhagavan, and later on Muruganar would give that verse to Bhagavan for correction. So the same idea that's expressed in this lines from 179 to 184 is expressed in this Guruvachaka Kovai, verse 169. இணக்கமிலா தெம்முனையை யானே எதிர்த்து பிணங்குவேலாக பிளந்து வணங்குவேன் என்ன இனி தூக்கின் எவருமேனும் என ஓர் முடவன் சொன்ன கதை சூதே இது அது சொன்ன கதை சூதே அது. So here இணக்கமிலா தெம்முனையை. Temmunai is war front. In an unparalleled war front, யானே எதிர்த்து பிணங்குவியலா பிளந்து. I alone can fight against the entire army at the war front, and I can actually kill them all, creating a mountain of dead bodies. Vananguven, I will win them over. Enna ini தூக்கின் எவருமேனும் என ஓர் முடவன். All I need is somebody to get me up and make me stand up. As it is, ஓர் முடவன், one cripple, சொன்ன கதை சூதே அது. That is the story that he wove around, claiming victory while he can't even stand up. Likewise, our ego, which can't exist on its own, has to entirely depend on the Supreme Self for its existence, claims that it can accomplish all sorts of actions. That is a laughable act. So that is why Muruganar ends the prior verse by saying, Elli Nahayaduvon. He thinks about it and smiles and laughs at them. Why? Because it is false and it can't be done. And the paradox is people who claim such things do not understand that those claims are untrue and they cannot be manifested. But yet they go on believing such lie only for their self-gratification or the ego sustenance. So the only path out of this is to understand the source of their ego, which alone is the path that Bhagavan recommends as self-inquiry. Rereading this verse, these lines of this verse, தன்னை எழுப்பு விடின் தானே தனி பொருது துன்னலரை எல்லாம் தொலைப்பலெனும் ஓர் முடவன் போல் தாம் இயங்கும் தன்மை சிவசக்தியால் என்று உணரார் தாம் மயங்கிச் சித்திபல சார்வதா சேட்டிப்பார் உச்சமத்த மாக்கள் உளறுபடி ஊக்காமாம் அச்சமர்த்தை எள்ளி நகையாடுவோன் தாழ் போற்றி. Moving on, lines 185 to 186. அஞ்சு பூதத்துள்ளும் அவ்வதன் பண்படைவே எஞ்சலிலாதடைந்த எம்மான் தாழ் போற்றி. So here Muruganar goes on explaining how Bhagavan pervades all great 5 elements, namely space, air, fire, water, and earth. And in addition to making them appear, he is also the essence and the sustainer of their ordained functions, and he ensures those functions are performed without any defect or blemish. Every one of those 5 elements perform what they are destined to do exactly as they are destined to do. That is granted to them by Bhagavan through his grace. All praise to his sacred feet. Anju Bhudathullum. Anju Bhudathullum. Anju is 5. Bhudathullum is 5 great elements. Bhutas are elements. These are space, air, fire, water, and earth. Avvadan Panpadaive. Within each, he is the very essence of what those elements are. And in addition, Enjaliladu Adaitha Yemman Tal Potri. Angel means defect. Angel ila means without defect or without blemish. Adaitha. Adaitha means Adaitha is preordained or destined or designated. Yemman Tal Potri, my Lord, and let's praise his holy feet. Here, the holy feet means the inner awareness, which Muruganar will shortly reveal, and the purpose of why he keeps praising the holy feet, because that alone is the only path for our supreme realization. So, 2 questions arise. Obviously, the first one is, what are those 5 elements? The second is, when Muruganar says within their ordained functions, what are those functions for each of those 5 elements? Here, these 2 lines refer to a Tiruvachakam verse called Tiruvachakam, and in that, Mickkavachagar gives an extensive, elaborate explanation of these 5 different elements and how the Lord sustains all 5 of them. Let's just quickly review that. Paridai Aindai Parandai Potri, Neeridai Nangai Nihaldai Potri, Thiyidai Moondrai Tihalndai Potri, Validai Irandai Mahaldai Potri, Velidai Ondrai Vilaindai Potri. So here, the 5 elements are discussed in detail, and referring to these 5 different elements referred to in Tiruvachakam, Muruganar makes a subtle reference of this Anju Bhudathullum. So what are they? First, Paridai Aindai Parandai Potri. So within the earth, he has become all 5 things. What are those 5 things? We will review that. Neeridai Nangai Potri. Within water, he remains as 4. Thiyidai Moonrai Tihandai Potri. In fire, he remains as 3. Valiyidai Irandai Mahundai Potri. Within air, he remains 2. Veliyidai. Veli means space. Vali means air. Veliyidai Undrai Vilaindai Potri. Within the space, he remains as singular. So what does that mean? Here's a quick chart I made, so it's very easy to follow. Within earth, we could smell, taste, see, hear, and feel. So all these 5 functions of smell, taste, see, hear, and feel can happen within earth. So that is the Paridai Aindai poetry. So all 5 of these functions are possible in earth. Water does not have smell, but retains all 4 of them, meaning it can be tasted, seen, heard, and felt. Fire cannot be smelt or tasted, but can be seen, heard, or felt. Likewise, wind can be heard and felt, but can't be seen, tasted, or smelt. So it's wrong to say wind smells. In a sense, wind actually carries the smell of the earth along with it, but pure air does not have any smell. And space can only be felt, can't be heard, seen, tasted, or smelt. So this 5 functions of smelling, tasting, seeing, hearing, and feeling, combined with those 5 elements, earth, water, fire, wind, and space, create this matrix. And this happens perfectly, blemishlessly, because of the grace Bhagavan bestows on all beings. So that is what is referred to in the Tiruvachakam verse. Paridai Aindai Parandai Potri, Neeridai Nangai Nihaldai Potri, Thiyidai Moonrai Tihandai Potri, Valiyidai Irandai Mahundai Potri, Veliyidai Ondrai Vilaindai Potri. And that reference is what is here in Sri Ramana Sannidhi Murai, Ramana Puranam. Anju Bhuda Thullum Avvadan Panpadaive Enjalilad Adainda Yemman Tal Potri. So composed of the 5 great elements, namely space, air, fire, water, and earth, he is their very essence, the source and sustainer of their ordained functions. All praise to his sacred feet. In addition to this particular reference in Tiruvachakam, there is also a reference in Thirumandiram by Tirumular. In that, the verse goes as follows: Ayum Arivodu Ariyada Mamaye Aya Karanam Padaikum Aimbudamum Aya Pala Indriyam Avatrutan Aya Arul Aindumam Arutchaigaye. Arutchaigaye is his divine grace or divine graceful action. What is his divine graceful action? Ayum Arivodu, the discerning intellect. Ariyada Maya, the unfathomable Maya, the supreme Maya or the supreme mother, the Shakti, that is the manifested aspect of the self. Aya Karanam Padaikum Aimbudamum. This body or this matter is formed by these 5 elements, all of those 5 elements, the discerning intellect, the unfathomable Maya, Aya Pala Indriyam Avatrudan, all senses, all the 5 senses, namely that which can be see, which is eyes, ears, nose, touch, or the skin, and mouth, which can taste. So the combination of elements and those actions that can actually act, which are indriyas, the 5 supreme graces are, we have seen the 5 supreme graces of the Lord previously, which is creation, sustenance, destruction, hiding, and providing grace or giving grace. Those are the 5 things controlled by Brahma, Vishnu, Rudra, Maheshwara, and Sadasiva. All of these things arise solely from his divine grace. These actions are done because he wills so. He wants it so. That is the grace. That is the grace of the self, which makes the manifested part of the self, which is Shakti, or the universal mother, which sustains all these things. So that is referred to in this verse by Muruganar in line 185 to 186. அஞ்சு பூதத்துள்ளும் அவ்வதன் பண்படைவே எஞ்சலிலாது அடைத்த எம்மான் தாழ் போற்றி. So moving on, lines 187 to 188. மதியினிடை தன்மை, கதிரினிடை வெம்மை, மதியினிடை ஓர்மை வகுத்தோன் அடி போற்றி. Here the word madi is used twice. First, madi means the moon. Second, madi also means the mind. So when Muruganar uses madi for the first time in the first line, madi inidai tanmai, here he means the moon or the coolness radiating from the moon. Madi inidai tanmai. Tanmai is the soothing coolness that radiates or that permeates the moonlight. Madiyinidai tanmai, kadirinidai vemmai. Kadar is usually means rays. Here kadar also means the radiant sun. So kadirinidai vemmai. So the radiant heat of the sun is also created by him. Madiyinidai. So second time when he uses madi, here it means the mind. Madiyinidai ormai. So the possibility of the supreme unity available for the mind to abide is Madhiyanidai Ormai. So he made that possible. Vahuton. Vahuton is he created or he orchestrated. Adi meaning let his holy feet or his sacred feet. Potri meaning let's praise him. Let's praise his holy feet. So Madhiyanidai Tanmai, Kadirinidai Vemmai, Madiyinidai Ormai, Vahuton Adi Potri. He ordained the moon's soothing coolness, the sun's radiant heat, and the supreme stillness where the mind may rest in oneness. Praise be to his holy feet. So, there is a subtle reference to the yogic literature here. In the yogic literature, they divide three important nadis, Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna. Ida and Pingala are the moon and the sun. And the Sushumna is the middle or the sacred nadi, in which when the breathing on both Ida and Pingala nadi are balanced, the Sushumna nadi is said to be opening, which is one that actually gives the samadhi experience for the yogi. Obviously, Bhagavan says that's a very circuitous path. We could just go directly to the Supreme Self by inquiring the Self, who am I? Here, the subtle reference is the Supreme Self alone created the Ida and Pingala, as well as Sushumna, as well as the oneness that is achieved through the abidance in the Sushumna Nadi. So there is also a possibility to take these two lines with that meaning, although the most straightforward meaning is he ordained the moon's soothing coolness, the sun's radiant heat, and the supreme stillness where the mind may rest in oneness. Praise be to his sacred feet. So here, Muruganar goes on expanding into all different manifested things are all because of the grace of the Lord, the supreme act of compassion that has allowed the manifested Shakti or the Supreme Mother to bestow their grace. So all these things, all these beings are created. And that's what Muruganar says in line number 179 to 184. Tamiyangum Tanmai Sivasaktiyal Endrunarar. Meaning, only those who do not understand the dynamic dance between Shiva and Shakti is the one that is responsible for manifesting all this world, are those who claim they do the action. Here he gives the behind the scenes or the explanation behind the Shiva Shakti principle. Now, going on to the next two lines. Donda nirdondamavai thonre uirtahaitam banda muttika padaithon tal potri. These two lines are beautiful. He says, Donda nirdondam avai thonre uirtahaitam. So the natural question is, if the whole thing is Shiva Shakti principle, why are these beings created? And why can't everybody be given liberation? The answer is everybody is given liberation. And from time immemorial, he brought forth, meaning the Supreme Self, or Bhagavan, brought forth duality as well as non-duality. So it's not like it's a contradiction. It happened because of the Leela, or because of the manifested and unmanifested reality. So Dondam is duality, Nirdondam is non-duality. So both have existed from time immemorial. Why is that? Virtohaitam, the entire set of beings that are sustained by the self, can either be bonded because of choosing duality, or be at the supreme abode of the self, which is called as liberation, through the non-dual path. Both are available for us to choose. So our fundamental choice is whether we are in the bondage stage, or because we have chosen the duality or the dual path, or our choice of remaining in the non-dual experience of the self, which is the definition of liberation. That choice is given to us from time immemorial. And he alone made that happen. And let's praise his holy feet for that. Donda nirdondam avai thonre uirtahaitam. Thonre means from time immemorial or ancient. Uirtohai. Uirtohai is all living beings. Tam banda muktika. Tam. So for their bondage, bandam is bondage, or connections, or relations with material things. So when the path of duality is chosen, naturally bondage happens because we are hooked to the external thing, believing this body is the self. That is a definition of duality. Or nirdondam, the non-dual experience also equally exists, which is identifying the supreme self through the inquiry of who am I. When the clarity of the self exists, the recognition that the self alone exists, nothing else exists, that samadhi experience. So it's not just an intellectual understanding, but it's an experiential reality. And that experiential reality itself is liberation. So he brought forth duality for bondage and non-duality for liberation. Praise be to his sacred feet. Banda Muktika Padaithon, he alone created it. Tal Potri, let's praise his holy feet for that, which is the inner awareness that shines in each one of us. So this phrase, Donda Nittondam, is extensively used by Tayumanavar in very many verses. As if to expand on these two lines, there is a beautiful Tayumanavar verse. Incidentally, Bhagavan quotes this verse often in many of his talks. I'll read this. It's a very long verse by Tayumanavar. Here, Tayumanavar gives the pairs of opposites. He says long and short, cleanliness and uncleanness, happiness and sadness, duality and non-duality, manifested and unmanifested, passion and dispassion, speech and silence, engagement versus liberation, all the actions or curses versus no curses, or no actions, having a split mind or complete abidance in the self, pride versus lack of pride, grandness versus simplicity, male versus female, daily or permanent versus impermanent, poison versus pure or nectar. So he goes on explaining all these things. At the end of it says, you alone manifest in all of them as the inner happening across all these duality, without which how can this whole universe and many, many universes can exist? O Lord, you are the supreme Purna, the blissful Param, or the self. So that's how this whole poem goes. The most important phrase is the Dvanda Nirdvandamum, which is the second line of this verse I have highlighted. That is the phrase that Muruganar uses. So I read this whole verse by Tayumanavar. It's beautiful. Suttamum Asuttamum Dukka Suga Bedamum தொந்தமுடன் தொந்தமும் ஸ்தூலமொடு சூட்சுமமும் ஆசையும் நிராசையும் சொல்லுமொரு சொல்லின் முடிவும் பெத்தமொடு முத்தியும் பாவமொடு அபாவமும் பேதமொடு அபேத நிலையும் பெருமையுடன் சிறுமையும் அருமையுடன் எளிமையும் பெண்ணினுடன் ஆணும் மற்றும் நித்தமும் அனித்தமும் அஞ்சன நிரஞ்சனமும் நிற்களமும் நிகழ் சகலமும் நீதியும் அநீதியும் ஆதியோடு அநாதியும் நிர்விடய விடய வடிவும் அத்தனையும் நீ அளதல் அத்தனையும் இல்லையெனில் யாங்கள் உன்னை அறியும் உண்டோ, யாங்கள் உன்னை அன்றியும் உண்டோ, அண்ட பகிரண்டமும் அடங்க ஒரு நிறைவாகி ஆனந்தமான பரமே. So as I said, he keeps adding up all these dualities, and I had listed most of them in my commentary earlier on. And then the last section is probably the most important. Attanayum நீ அலதல் அத்தனையும் இல்லையெனில் யாங்களுனை அன்றியுண்டோ. In all of these things, all of these beginning, ending, poison, nectar, dharmic and adharmic, beginning, end, male, female, big, small, every pair of opposite, everything, attanayum, everything. நீ அலதல் அத்தனையும் இல்லையெனில். If you have not alone manifested and pervaded in every one of these things, யாங்கள் உனை அன்றியும் உண்டோ. How can we exist without you? So in other words, what we call as and what we call as all these dualities, all these actions, all our conceptions, everything is manifested by the Supreme Self. Anda bahirandamum. This universe and all universes, adanga oru niraivaagi, everything abides in your perfection. Niraivu is perfection or Puranam. Anandamana Parame. You are the most blissful supreme self. So this song is praising the self as pervading everything and everywhere. So that reference is brought in by Muruganar in lines 189 to 190. தொந்த நிர்தொந்தம் அவை தொன்றே உயிர்த்தகைத்தம் வந்த முக்திக்கா படைத்தோன் தாழ் போற்றி. From time immemorial, he brought forth duality for bondage and non-duality for liberation. Praise be to his sacred feet. In addition, Bhagavan also makes an explanation in Ulladu Narpadu, the reality of the 40 verses of reality. Verse 9, இரட்டைகள் முப்புடிகள் என்றும் ஒன்று பற்றி இருப்பவாம் அவ்வொன்றேது என்று கருத்தினுள் கண்டால் கழலும் அவை கண்டவரே உண்மை கண்டார் கலங்காரே காண். இரட்டைகள் முப்புடிகள் என்றும் ஒன்று பற்றி இருப்பவாம் அவ்வொன்றேது என்று கருத்தினுள் கண்டால் கழலும் அவை கண்டவரே உண்மை கண்டார் கலங்காரே காண். இரட்டைகள் முப்புடிகள், the twos and threes. Twos is the duality. Threes are like the seer, seen, and this act of seeing. So depending on your duality or the triads, all of these things depend on only one thing, which is the ego or the I thought. இரட்டைகள் முப்புடிகள் என்றும் ஒன்று பற்றி. They all exist and they all depend upon only one thing, the ego. இருப்பவாம், they exist. அவ் ஒன்றேது என்று. if one asks within their heart, who am I, or who's his ego, என்று கருத்தினுள், within their heart, கண்டால், if they witness it, or if they find it, or if they experience it. So it's not an intellectual inquiry, it's an experiential inquiry, which is carefully looking our inner awareness and tracing this I thought and keep going inwards until such time the perfection exists. Kazhalum avai. These triads and the duality would completely slip away. Kazhalum avai. They leave. So what remains? The awareness alone exists, which is Supreme Self. Kandavare. Only those who experience this truth, Unmai Kandar, they alone know the truth. Kalangare Khan, they will never be confused or they will never be perplexed. So this is Bhagavan's sacred words explained in Ulladu Narpadu. Now obviously Ulladu Narpadu was written in late 1928 and 29. At the time when Ramana Sannidhi Murai, volume 2 came along in 1938, which is when Ramana Puranam was composed and added as the first section of Sri Ramana Sannidhi Murai. This verse was well understood by Muruganar, especially since Bhagavan taught Muruganar of the two people that Bhagavan taught Ulladu Narpadu. So that reference is made here, which is Donda Nirdondam Avai Thundre Virtahaitam Banda Muktika Padaiton Tal Potri. So from very ancient times, he created both duality and non-duality, respectively, for bondage and liberation. Praise be to his sacred feet. Moving on, lines number 191 and 192. Here, Muruganar takes a slightly different term, explaining the dharmic action and adharmic action and what happens to them. Adiyarku nallan, arandavarum polla kodiyarku, val idiyam kutruvan tal potri. Adiyarku nallan. Adiyar means those who are devoted or those who are surrendered. Nallan, he is very compassionate. So to those who are devoted and surrendered, he is supremely compassionate. Arandavarum polla kodiyarku val idiyam kutruvan tal potri. So what happens to others? Arandavarum, those who have pursued not a righteous path, or those who defy dharma. Arandavarum polla, they are not normal. Polla kudiyar, they are wicked people. So those wicked people who have defied the dharma or the righteous path, val idiyam kutruvan tal potri, he strikes them with the severity. Val idiyam, val means the harsh. Idi means like a lightning. So he strikes them like lightning. Who does that? Kutruvan. He himself becomes Lord Yama for them. So obviously those who surrender are saved. Those who do not surrender and go on acting in pursuit of their passions and through their external engagements, not following the righteous path, are struck like with lightning from Lord Yama, and their body dies. So what does it mean? When the body dies, they are born again. So they are going through a cycle of birth and death, and that's why Lord Yama appears. And those who have surrendered, Lord Yama does not appear because they go into the supreme abode of the Father or the supreme abode of the Self. And in the reality of the Self, there is no birth and death, and there is no Lord Yama present there. So naturally the question comes, I mean, what is the path? What is the righteous path and what is the unrighteous path? The definition that Muruganar has given in Sri Ramana Bodham of the righteous path is very simple. Those who pursue self-inquiry and hold on to the inner awareness, I am I, all the time. And holding on to that, any action that is performed is dharmic action. Every time the mind springs forth, when the mind acts without being in touch with the supreme awareness, which shines as I am I all the time in the heart, such actions are not dharmic because those are performed by the mind. Those actions will have reactions, and those reactions cause the birth and death again and again. So the paramount importance of self-observation and self-awareness and abiding in the self is for this birth and death not to come about. So that alone is the dharmic action, which is to be abiding in the self all the time. Every other action of any kind, without abiding in the self, without attending to the self, without attending to the inner awareness that constantly shines within us as I am I, constitutes as deviating from the self or deviating from the righteous path. So the righteous path is the inner path or the inner awareness. Every other path, every other action, every course of passion, every pursuit is not that. So the recommendation here is not to act. The recommendation here is to act while abiding in the pure self. And whatever actions could be done, let that happen. And one experiences trying to hold on to the self and then acting would naturally quieten all faculties. Natural relaxation occurs because the Supreme Self is blissful. Happiness alone exists. And any actions, reactions, anybody yelling and screaming, nothing affects such a jnani. And that's a state Bhagavan was always present during his physical life and continues to be present to date. And that's what Muruganar says. Adiyarku nallan aramdavarum polla kodiyarku vallidiyam kutruvan thal potri. He is the most benevolent for his surrendered devotees, for all others who naturally don't follow the dharmic path. He strikes them with the lightning, with the severity of Lord Yama. They have to face the death and then the further birth. The same exact idea is referred to by Muruganar in Sri Ramana Bodham Volume 1, verse number 161. Nallar tamakku naninallan matrange pollar tamakku mihap pollane polgindran ellar tamakkum poduva vial sorubat tollon inayana sollavona arkme. Nallar tamakku naninallan. For those noble people, he is the noblest thing. Matru ange, for others, pollar tamakku, all others who are not in the pursuit of self, are those who are not surrendered. Tamakku miha pollani, he becomes their action, reaction, and he becomes the very evil that they experience. Polhindran, he exists like that. Ellar tamakkum poduva yel surubak. For everyone, whether you pursue the dharmic path or not dharmic path, he continues to shine within each one of us, within our heart. Yel surubam, as most naturally, as most generally, most graciously, he shines always. Tolon, he is time immemorial, or he has no birth, no death. He exists forever. Inayana solla vanan arkme. However, can anybody define who he is verbally? No, because he can only be experienced. The moment's word come in, every word fails to experience the Supreme Self in its glory. They only become intellectual. So that's what Muruganar again urges us to go into the experiential part of the self, not necessarily get swayed away by the words and the actions that come about. And going back to the original two lines, lines 191 to 192, அடியார்க்கு நல்லான் அறந்தவரும் பொல்லா கொடியார்க்கு வல்லிடியாம் குற்றுவன் தாழ் போற்றி. To the devoted who surrendered, he is supremely compassionate. Yet to the unrighteous who defy dharma, he strikes with the severity of Lord Yama himself, like a lightning or harsh lightning. Praised be to his sacred feet. Now, lines 193 to 196. அடியேத்தும் அன்பரை தன் அந்தமில் வீட்டின்பக் குடியேற்றும் மிக்க குணநலத்தான் எந்தம் மிடியால் குறைந்த குடில் ஏவ அருள் தீயால் புடியார்க்கு மூரல் புராந்தகன் தாழ் போற்றி. அடியேத்தும் அன்பரை. So why should one worship his holy feet? Here's the reason. To those who love his sacred feet. So what is sacred feet? For those who love their inner awareness and abide in the inner awareness, those great surrendered devotees, for those, Tan Andamil Vitinba, he grants a place in the eternal abode of bliss. Andamil. Andamil is there is no end or there is no beginning, which is there is no end or beginning for what? Vitinba kudi, Vitu inba kudiyetrum. Vidu here is the supreme liberation, inbam is bliss. So the eternal abode of the bliss, which is what? Which is completely abiding in the self in a non-dual, pure samadhi way. Kudiyetrum, he bestows that. Mikka gunanalathan. His nobility is boundless or endless. Mikka, it's great. It's the greatest nobility. What is the greatest nobility? If only we hold on to his holy feet, which is our inner awareness that shines as I am I, the rest of the work of taking us and permanently hosting us in his abode of the eternal bliss is his. He does that part. We don't need to strive anything else. The only action we need to do, which is very, very clear in the words of Muruganar here, is Adiyettu Manbarai. Our only action is pursuing the act of self-inquiry and abiding and surrendering the feet of the Lord, which is the inner awareness that we experience in our own heart. And that's all the act that we are supposed to do. And for those such devotees, he grants a place in the supreme eternal abode of bliss. That's his grace, and that is his boundless nobility. However, in them, however, my medial, due to my extreme poverty or due to my poverty nature of my mind or my ignorant mind. Here, poverty is referred to as the lack of spiritual maturity. That is referred to as poverty, not the act of not having money. So in the medial, because of my poverty of spiritual wealth, Kurainda Kudil Eva, Kurainda Kudil, I have taken on the form of this lesser vessel. What is the lesser vessel or lesser home? Which is the vessel of this body or the host of this body. So because of lack of spiritual currency, I have identified myself with the form that this body is the self. Kurainda Kudil Eva, Arul Tiyal. So what does he do? Despite my lack of wealth in spirituality, his grace, Arul Tiyal, which is the grace of fire, meaning the supreme blaze of fire, Podi Akku Mooral Purandahan Tal Potri. He burns away my delusion that I am this body. And he smiles, and Purandahan is he who had destroyed 3 cities. This is the mythical story of Lord Shiva, who destroyed 3 cities. What are those 3 cities? Which is the 3 different acts of impurity: Anavam, Kanvam, Maya, which is ego, actions, and Maya. He burns away all 3 of them. How does he do it? Because of his grace. Even though, because of lack of my spiritual wealth, I have taken over this body as my form or lesser vessel. Through his grace, he burnt away my ignorance through his smiling grace and burnt away my delusion. Praise be to his holy feet. Purandahan Tal Potri. Adietum Anbarai Tan Andamil Vitinba Kudietrum Mikka Gunanalathan Yenda Midial Kurainda Kudil Eva Arul Tiyal Pudiaku Mural Purandahan Tal Potri. So here again, the grace of Bhagavan is explained beautifully by Muruganar, in that for those who are naturally bestowed with the wealth of the supreme clarity of the self, he directly grants them the abode. But even for me, meaning he talks about himself, Muruganar, though I'm ignorant, and because of that ignorance, because of that poverty of lack of spiritual wealth, I have taken over this body and have believed this body is the self. And that ignorance also burnt because of his grace, like how Shiva burnt 3 cities. And let's praise his holy feet, meaning again and again, Muruganar says the same thing. All these attributes, which are impossible to enumerate, impossible to explain, and impossible made to understand, but can only be experienced, but can only be understood through the experience of the self-inquiry, which is taught by Bhagavan. And Bhagavan has categorically said, no other method can grant liberation except for inquiry. And the inquiry grants because it gets directly to his holy feet. And once we are at his holy feet, it's his grace that gets us to the supreme liberation. So that promise is made in these lines. Therefore, these lines are great. Adietum Anbarai Tan Andamil Vitinba Kudietrum Mikka Gunanalathan Yendam Midial Kurainda Kudil Eva Arul Tiyal Pudiyak Mural Purandahan Tal Potri. Going into where we started today. We started at line number 179. தன்னை இழுப்பிவிடின் தானே தனி பொருது துன்னலரை எல்லாம் தொலைப்பல் எனும் ஓர் முடவன் போல் தாமியங்கும் தன்மை சிவசக்தியால் என்றுணரார் தாமயங்கி சித்திபல சார்வதா செட்டிப்பார் உச்சமத்த மாக்கள் உளறுபடி ஊக்கமாம் அச்சமர்த்தை எள்ளி நகையாடுவோன் தாழ் போற்றி அஞ்சு பூதத்துள்ளும் அவ்வதன் பண்படைவே எஞ்சலிலாதடைந்த எம்மான் தாழ் போற்றி மதியினிடை தன்மை கதிரினிடை வெம்மை மதியினிடை ஓர்மை வகுத்தோன் அடி போற்றி தொந்த நிற்தொந்தம் அவை தொன்றே உயிர்த்தொகைத்தம் வந்த முக்திக்கா படைத்தோன் தாழ் போற்றி அடியார்க்கு நல்லான் அறந்தவரும் பொல்லா கொடியார்க்கு வல்லிடியாம் கூற்றுவன் தாழ் போற்றி அடியேத்தும் அன்பரை தன் அந்தமில் வீட்டின்ப குடியேற்று மிக்க குணநலத்தான் எந்த மிடியால் குறைந்த குடில் ஏவ அருள் தீயால் பொடியாக்கு மூரல் புராந்தகன் தாழ் போற்றி. With that, we wrap up today. I'm happy to answer if there are any questions.
Hello. Namo Ramanaya. Kekarda?
Yes, Mama, we can hear you.
Line 195. Midial Korainda Kudil Vevana area. And the English translation la சரியா இருக்கு. ஏவன் இருக்கு இல்லையா தமிழ்ல?
Yes.
அது வேவன் இருக்கணும். B for Victor.
Okay.
மற்றபடி எக்ஸலண்டா இருக்கு, கேட்டுட்டே இருக்கலாம். ரொம்ப பாக்கியம் பண்ணியிருக்கோம். தேங்க்யூ.
Thank you, Mama. I'll make the change. Thank
Yeah.
you for joining, and thank you for your kind words and your blessings.
Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you, and have a wonderful day. We will see you again next week.
Thank you, Hari. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.